Today's sermon comes from 2 Chronicles chapter 34, verses 14 to 19. The title of today's sermon is Rediscovering God, which can be controversial. But the text says, "While they were bringing out the money that had been brought into the house of the Lord, the priest Hilkiah found the book of the law of the Lord given through Moses. Hilkiah said to the secretary Shaphan, 'I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord.' And Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan. Shaphan brought the book to the king and further reported to the king, 'All that was committed to your servants they are doing. They have emptied the money that was found in the house of the Lord. They have delivered it into the hands of the overseers and workers.' The secretary Shaphan informed the king, 'The priest Hilkiah has given me a book.' Shaphan then read it aloud. When the king heard the words of the law, he tore his clothes." The word of the Lord. Rediscovering God. There are things in life that sometimes get lost. Sometimes we place them somewhere and forget where they were placed. Sometimes we just can't find it. There's a story about a grandpa who, when he was young, he put his skates on a little tree and then forgot where he placed them. Years and years went by. He had kids, he had grandkids, and then one day his grandkids were playing in the yard and they saw skates growing out of a tree. The skates that he thought he had lost indeed were never lost. They were exactly where he had left them. And now 40, 50 years later, they had become part of a tree grown into it. There was a lady who was in her yard once, and she lost her wedding ring. She couldn't find it. She searched and searched and couldn't find it at all. And then one day, 16 years later, she was building up a garden and decided to grow some carrots. And one day when she pulled one of the carrots out, there she saw that her wedding ring, which she had lost so many years earlier, was wrapped around this carrot that she thought, this ring that she thought was lost forever. This ring that was gone, this ring that was misplaced, indeed found its way back. But was it really lost? Were the skates really lost? Or was it that the person forgot where they had left it or where they dropped it? To think about some of the context of the text that we were reading today, there's a lot of things going on. The Chronicles, it does just that. The books of Chronicles 1 and 2. They both give the account of the kings of Israel, the kings of Judah. And in this sense, or in this case, they're talking about the king Josiah. It goes back to his great-great-grandfather, King Hezekiah, who was one of the reformers after, once again, the people had fallen, the people had given up on God, the people had left God to follow other gods. Hezekiah brought them back. But one of the interesting things is that he brought them back, but didn't have actual text. He did it out of tradition more than anything else. Tradition that the priests continued to follow. Tradition that was continuously at the forefront, but sometimes had fallen back. Hezekiah brought the tradition forward, and they worshiped the Lord, and he was found to be a good king, a man after God's heart. Then his son, Manasseh, he fell to the wayside in terms of following God. The traditions that his father had re-implemented, had brought back, had fallen to the wayside also because Manasseh decided to follow the ways of old, the old ways of following the other gods, not God, Yahweh, who freed them from Egypt. Instead, he built altars and he built golden images, and they followed these gods, God with a little g, not the God, capital G. And his son came, Amon. He came up and he followed in his father's disobedience, but he didn't last long. The people got tired of this. The people got tired of following these false gods, and they eliminated the king and implemented his son Josiah, who was very, very young, but yet followed God faithfully. And in our story today, in our text, they're tearing down the sanctuaries, the altars, the things that were given to the previous gods, and using them to rebuild the temple of God, to rededicate the people of God, to bring the people of God back into relationship with God. And they found something in the sanctuary. They found the law of Moses. Does that sound weird to you? The people of God, the people who God brought from Egypt, the people who God continuously provided for and gave love, and who were always at the forefront in terms of God and God's perspective, had forgotten about God. They lost the very thing that made them unique. They had lost the law of Moses, the law that was given after they had come out of Egypt. The thing that was their pride and joy, the thing that was the center of their beliefs, the thing that was making them who they were. They lost it. Or did they really lose it at all? It was in the same place it had always been. I wonder if they were looking for it. They happened to stumble upon it as they were clearing out all these things from the sanctuary, from the temple. As they were cleaning out the altars of Baal, the gold that they had put, the things that they had dedicated to these other little g gods. They happened to stumble upon the law of Moses that was where it had always been, at the heart of the sanctuary. And they read it aloud. They read it to the king, and the king mourned because he realized we have been doing it wrong, because we have forgotten our center. We have pushed aside that which was given to us, that which made us special. We decided to leave it where it was and go off and make our own traditions and routines and say, this is what the law is. The very thing that God had provided them to help them was a thing that they had left behind and forgotten. But now they ran into it once again. And they realized that they were running on tradition when they should have been running on faith. They realized that their traditions may have helped them, may have been a slight image of what it should have been. Maybe an opaque picture, an abstract picture of what they should have been doing. But it wasn't clear enough to make them who God wanted them to be. Their traditions were helpful because it helped them to remember God. But they forgot their faith in that God and lost their way. Tradition without faith is just a routine because we forget why we do it. And if you ask somebody in a church, why do you do this way? The normal answer is because we've always done it this way. It's not very often that you hear, well, this is how it began, this is how it's evolved, and this is where it is today. We've always done it this way, so therefore we should always do it this way. Tradition becomes routine without faith. We do it because it's always been done, but is that beneficial to us? It might have a seed that helps us to continue. It might have an abstract picture that allows us to see why it was created, but we don't have a clear enough picture. We're still struggling because the picture is not clear enough. But yet when we come to faith, when we remember why we do what we do and how we do it is because of our faith, Faith reminds us of how important it is to do what we do. Faith tells us why we do what we do. Faith allows us to see beyond what's before us. We can look at a tomorrow with hope because of our faith. It's faith that carries us through those storms and those tough times. It's faith that is built upon knowing and getting to know God even better. These people, though they had some image of God, did not have the whole image until they found the book of the law. For your faith, how do you see God? How do you envision God? When you think about your faith, what do you see? How do you see it? What is faith in your life? Is faith just a tradition? You come on Sunday because you've always come on Sunday. Is faith just a routine where you do what you do because you've always done it that way? Or does faith mean something more to you? Because real active faith cannot just be a routine. Real active faith wants to grow more. As Jesus said, a mustard seed of faith can move a mountain. What does an apple seed of faith move? Or an orange seed of faith move? Or an avocado seed of faith? If a mustard seed can move mountains, what can growing your faith do? And that's where we are. That's where we are today as a people, as individuals, as a community, as a world. There are people of faith who are struggling because though they think they're worshiping God, what they're really doing is tradition. Though they think they see an image of God, what they see is an abstract image that needs to be cleared. When we see God and what God is doing, how are we seeing it? How am I seeing God? How are you seeing God? Are you seeing God in your everyday as God moves through your everyday? Are you able to see all that God does? Or are you only able to see this abstract image, a shadow of who and what God is or could be? Or are you able to see God? And this morning, I encourage you to rediscover God in your life. Today, I encourage you to find God exactly where you left God. Just because we have been here for a long time, and many of us have been doing this for a long, long time. We know the answers to give, and we know the responses to give, and we know how to look and how to act. But when you are alone with God, where is God in your life? Is God left here at the altar of church and you go off and live your life just to come and get recharged on a Sunday morning? Or is God somewhere in your past where your faith was shaken? Is God left there? Because it's easier to ignore it than to bring God with me. I encourage you in this day, in this week, and in the coming days and weeks to rediscover your love for God. God is right where you left God. God has not disappeared, and God has not moved, and God has not run away, but instead it is you who has decided not to see where God is. God has been there the whole time. God has been knocking at your door. God has been calling to you, but have you responded to God? So often we decide to turn our backs and turn away because we feel that it's easier to compartmentalize and to leave things in different areas so that it won't hurt me now. But one of the things I've learned is that in life, nothing ever stays where it's supposed to stay. The pain from yesterday that you decided to ignore and push aside will come up again until you deal with it. The God that you pushed aside and tried to leave behind because you just want to do the tradition and not do the relationship thing is still there waiting and is still protecting and guiding, even though you're ignoring and just going through the routine. Do we have to discover the law every time? Do we have to rediscover or fall over the same things all the time? Or are we able to grow and mature and to learn? And rather than rediscovering the same thing again and again, maybe, just maybe, if we learned what we needed to, next time we will learn something new. Maybe, instead of rediscovering the same thing over and again, we as the people of God, we who have been on this journey for so long, we who have been through the grinder, through the storm, maybe instead of rediscovering it over and again, maybe we learn and keep the lesson so that God can teach us something new. So that God can open our eyes to new things. So that rather than saying, I remember when, we can say, I know that God is doing and I know that God is going to do. I remember when we stop. Let us discover God in this day. Let us rediscover what we have forgotten so that we can discover all the new things that God has for us. Stop trying to find the same treasure over and again, because it just means that you're burying it again and again and then stumbling upon it again and again. And every time you're just as happy, but are you really moving forward? Let us rediscover God today so that we can discover all the new things that God has for us from this moment forward. May the Lord open our eyes and our ears so that we can hear the voice of God. May the Lord open our hearts and minds so that we can understand it. And may the Lord be the guide that brings us beyond the rediscovery and takes us to all of the new discoveries that God has for each and every one of us here. Amen.